This podcast is brought to you by SarahRaven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to SarahRaven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven. And today I'm on my own again because I want to try and describe to you everything I know about conditioning flowers, cut flowers that is, because I don't often say this, but I think I must know almost as much as anyone about this subject because I have been growing cut flowers now for 32 years. And I don't really do events very much. I tend to grow flowers for here and for home. And I don't want to have to change my flowers more often than I absolutely have to. So I want them to last as long as they possibly can. Ideally, a minimum of 5 days. If they can do a week, that's even better. So that I can get up on a Saturday morning or on perhaps early one morning in the week on a beautiful morning and pick some flowers and decorate bits of the house. Gosh, I'm not going to try and claim I've got flowers on every single side table and every single bedside and every single bathroom. But I like having a scattering of flowers around the house. I really do. I think it brings life to a room and I really notice it for myself. It lifts my spirits, whatever the weather, but I want them to last. So I have experimented like Billy-O to try and make things last as long as they can. And so has Josie, our head gardener, who's come from a very, very different standpoint, because to be brutally frank, she's not overly keen on cut flowers. She says, cut flowers, dead flowers. And I know what she means, that thing of kind of, getting your duster out and collecting together all the dead petals. And, there's something very gloomy about that. And Arthur Parkinson, who sometimes co-hosts on here, he would laugh at me because he'd say, I come into your house, Sarah, and it's full of dead flowers. I'm ashamed to say he's right because I might have been away or busy and I come back and, oh dear, they're not looking very nice. Anyway, how to avoid that or to prolong the vase life as much as possible. And having been a medical student and had to learn, we were told on our first day at medical school, okay, guys, you have got to learn the equivalent of the London telephone directory. Well, you don't have telephone directories anymore. This was 40 years ago, but that was quite a daunting prospect. And we all got into rhymes and ways of remembering things. And how I remember when I'm thinking about conditioning flowers is they all begin with S, or nearly all. So let's start. Searing, number 1 S. This is what we do all the time at Perch Hill. Now, we do it more in spring. S, searing, spring. 75% of what we pick in spring is seared. Why? Because searing extends, prolongs the vase life of a flower by increasing the surface area of the xylem, which is the water uptake system in a plant, to take it to the flower. So it prolongs the flower, the individual flower life, by allowing more water to be taken up to that flower. And literally, by searing it, what you're doing is you're increasing the surface area for water absorption. And we do that in spring with 75% because in spring, most plants haven't had time to lay lignin down in the cell wall. So lignin is what makes sort of shrubs and trees woody, and it makes softer stems upstanding rather than floppy. And so, for instance, poppies have very little lignin in them at all because they grow so quickly, annual poppies, which is why they flop. And that's why in spring you see a 75%, whereas in autumn, stems have had time to develop more lignin in their cell wall, and so they're more upstanding. And so that's why 75% in spring, 25% in autumn. And searing is plunging the stem end into boiling water. So I've got the kettle on the boil. I've got a coffee mug or a heat-proof jug beside me. I put just an inch or two of boiling water into the heat-proof jug or mug, and I plunge the stem ends sitting in a bucket in cold water beside me into the boiling water for an amount of time that's proportional to the texture of the stem. So if it's lilac, which is really quite woody and has quite a big diameter, I give it 30 seconds. If it's Euphorbia Wulfenii, the big drumstick Euphorbia, I actually give it 45 seconds. If it's a bluebell, which is super soft, I give it 2 seconds, literally in, 1, 2, out. And when I come out, they go into cold water. So just like when you're wilting your spinach, you don't leave it in the hot water. You take it out, put it in a sink of cold water to cool it down immediately and to stop it cooking. And that's exactly what you're doing. So plunge into boiling water and you do 1/10 the stem length. You don't have to get your ruler out. You can just guess. But 1/10 of the stem length goes in to the boiling water proportional to the texture of the stem and then into cold water. Okay, so that's searing, and it increases the surface area for water absorption. And we do that more than any other technique. The next is sterilizing. And that's what we're doing now in the peak of summer. And all this is very important in summer, much more important than at any other time of year, the conditioning, because things are much more likely to flop in the heat of the day. And certainly today it's hot and it's windy. And so things are really struggling because they're photosynthesizing and transpiring away like bilio. Both those need water. So the cells are water depleted. And so they are quite floppy. They're not turgid. And that is why you really need to do conditioning very carefully in May, June, July, and August. Whereas in September, not so much, in October, not so much, because they've got lignin and it's cooling down then. So in spring, you need to condition carefully because things are more floppy because they're newly grown. In summer, you need to condition things carefully because it's hot and bright and can be quite windy. So sterilizing is what you do with any of the bigger bulbs. So for instance, lilies, I would remove the anthers from the filament because that prevents the pollen, when it ripens, dropping onto the stigma in the center of the flower and fertilizing it. You've sterilized the flower. You've prevented it sterilizing itself. It's true, a bee can still come along and fertilize the stigma, but there's less chance of that right then. So by sterilizing, you decrease the chance of fertilization. Once a flower is fertilized, it goes over because it's done its job. The seed has been fertilized. The flower's been fertilized, so seed will be formed. And so it's done its job of reproduction. So sterilizing is worthwhile, and I actually also do it with amaryllis in the winter. The next one is swaddling, which, to be honest, we're coming out of this time because it's mainly for tulips. And you know that thing that tulips do, which is that they continue to grow in the vase. So we actually do 2 things with the very heavy-headed tulips here, is that we swaddle them, so we wrap them up in brown paper and put them in a tight bucket to hold the heads vertically and leave them there for a couple of hours so they condition completely bolt upright. But also we do get a thick pin and we poke it through just below the flower and then remove it. Now what that does is it disrupts the growth plate. And the growth plate is the most active area of cellular division, which means those new cells haven't got no lignin at all and they're very floppy. So what you'll find is on day 3, 4, the flowers start looking at the table rather than looking at you when you wake up in the morning. And that's because that new fleshy tissue can't support the flower head. And so swaddling and spearing are what we do with tulips. The next one is submerging. And we do this with peonies, but as we move through the year, we also do this very, very much with hydrangeas, which we've just started picking now in July with limelight, which is a really beautiful one, which I absolutely adore, and Little Lime, which is its little baby brother. And when I'm picking those, I literally just pick them on a good stem, chuck them in the bath, leave them overnight, get them out, and they will then last 2 to 3 weeks in a vase. And if you buy hydrangeas and that they are floppy the next morning, then just chuck them in the bath. So flower and all, not stem down, flower up above the water, everything in the water. And that really makes a difference. And it's because they've evolved to absorb water over all their petal surface, and they can rehydrate through their petal surface area as well as through the stem end. And because their flowers are so complex, it's a hell of a job for that little stem to support that huge complex pom-pom flower at the end. And so submerging really helps it, and it helps also with peonies. As we move towards the end of the year, we move back towards hellebores. And hellebores need to be scored down the stem with a sharp knife. Ideally, I use one of those sort of fruit knives that have got a slightly blunt tip, but are slightly serrated. And I go all the way from the flower end to the base of the stem and all the way up the other side, from the base of the stem to the flower end on the other side. And basically, by scoring, I'm breaking through any lignin that might have formed and allowing water to be absorbed into the xylem over that whole surface area. I do then sear them, and I float them in the bath overnight. So they have 3 techniques, basically. They have scoring, they have searing, and they have submerging. And if, even after that, you bring them into a hot room, because they're super temperature sensitive. These are winter flowers. They don't like our centrally heated houses. So if you put them too hot or too sunny, they really struggle because they're, as you will know, shade lovers and cool temperature, damp soil lovers. But don't give up on them. Don't chuck them out. With all these things, with your hydrangeas, if they're floppy, don't chuck them out. Put them in the bath. Chuck your hydrangeas, chuck your hellebores into a bath. Leave them overnight, and you won't believe it. They'll be perky as anything in the morning. And even if you have to put them in the bath every night, they won't rot. They'll be fine, but it just cools them down. So that's scoring. And the final one, the final S, is staking. And this is right at the end of the year with amaryllis. We've just done an amaryllis cut flower trial here, and we found apple blossom, the beautiful white base, pink petals, sort of wash over the petal, looking rather like apple blossom. So Hippeastrum apple blossom has a vase life for 3.5 weeks, so it won. The ones I love at the moment, which are really glamorous, which are varieties like giraffe, and they're called the spider amaryllis, and they are super glamorous. Another one's called Chico, but they only last 10 days in a vase, whereas apple blossom really is outstanding. But you want to put a cane up the hollow stem, because the flowers of apple blossom will last 3 to 4 weeks, but the stem will only last 10 days to 2 weeks. So if there's a cane internally supporting the flower head up, standing in the air, you will prolong and maximize the vase life of those flowers. So, searing, sterilizing, swaddling, submerging, well, swaddling and piercing, so spearing, submerging, scoring, and staking. And the final one, I keep saying that, actually there are 2 more things I need to tell you. The rest between when you pick and when you arrange your flowers, not you, is very important. So you pick, condition in all the systems I've told you above, relevant to the particular variety. You then rest them in water in a cool, dark place overnight, and then you arrange them. You do not pick, plonk. That is when things flop. So not pick, plonk, but pick, condition, rest, arrange. And when you arrange, particularly in the winter, where you've got long vase life things like amaryllis, you use flower food, and a good dash of clear vinegar will stop bacterial reproduction because it's an acid liquid, and it stops bacterial reproduction. And it's the bacteria that create that slime, which blocks the water uptake, which kills the flower. So, searing, sterilizing, swaddling, spearing, submerging, scoring, staking, resting. flower food. There you've got it. Thanks so much for listening to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, with me trying to kind of hand over everything I've learnt over 3 decades about making cut flowers last as long as possible in water. Next week, we're going to stay with, well, mainly cut flowers, to be honest, as our sort of summer July theme. But Josie's going to join me because we've got a rose for picking trial in the garden here this year. And in July, we've got some results because we've been picking them now for 6 or 8 weeks, even with some varieties. And so we'll tell you the ones that we think have been particularly excellent, new ones and some tried and tested favourites. So join Josie and I next week. You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.